A Boeing whistleblower who alleged Spirit leadership had ignored manufacturing defects on the 737 MAX has suddenly died. This is the second Boeing whistleblower to have died in the last 2 months as the company has come under increased scrutiny. The Seattle Times first reported that Joshua Dean, a quality auditor at supplier Spirit Aerosystems, died Tuesday at just 45 years old from a fast-spreading infection. Dean had previously filed a complaint with the Federal Aviation Administration, alleging there was, quote, serious and gross misconduct by senior quality management of the 737 production line.
Dean was laid off last year and filed a complaint with the Department of Labor alleging that his termination was retaliation for raising concerns about the company's manufacturing plant. The news comes as journalist and activist Cory Doctorow reports that in a non-union shop in Charleston, South Carolina, where Boeing 787 Dreamliner is manufactured, there's a cage full of defective parts that have been pulled from production because they are not airworthy. Doctorow reports that hundreds of those parts were secretly pulled from that cage and installed on operating aircraft.
In other airline news, lawmakers advanced a bill that could undermine Biden's promise of automatic refunds on canceled or delayed flights, according to new reporting by The Lever. For context, the Biden administration announced a new rule last week that promised if airlines cancel or significantly delay flights, passengers will automatically be given their money back without having to go through the cumbersome process of requesting it.
Now, just days later, though, 4 members of Congress who oversee aviation policy started advancing legislation that could potentially reimpose the cumbersome process on passengers. The catch, these lawmakers form the 6th largest congressional recipients of campaign cash from the airline industry in the current election cycle.
Ooh. The Lever names the lawmakers: Republican Senator Ted Cruz, Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell, Democratic Representative Rick Larsen, and Republican Representative Sam Graves. A bipartisan effort there.
As always.
Look, exactly. The news that Biden had managed to do something that was just good news for consumers, not having us be hamstrung by corporations and having to jump through all these hoops to get reimbursed for when the airline messes up and causes some delay in our flight plans, was the kind of, frankly, basic populist program that I think could really help a candidate who wasn't quite as mired in the muck as Joe Biden is generate some positive goodwill in the public. Now it seems like that's not even going to happen, specifically because of the lobbying efforts of the airline industry capturing enough members of Congress to try to overturn this basic common sense sort of a rule.
What do you make about the death of yet another whistleblower type person, frustrated former employee? Obviously, losing your job is a difficult experience that can exacerbate your, bad health outcomes, something like that. So maybe it's just a coincidence, but obviously we talked about the
John
mysterious
Barnett.
to many people circumstances of the death of the other whistleblower who believed to have killed himself.
Yes. So, and this is what Cory Doctorow was writing about, and I strongly encourage people to read this entire article. So the allegation here is that there was a cage of parts that had been marked as defective. When parts are pulled from a plane and put into this cage, they're permanently marked so that there can be absolutely no confusion, and they will not be reintegrated into airline craft.
Well, shouldn't they just throw those away?
Well, that's a really good question. What Cory runs through in this piece is how the culture of Boeing shifted radically when it merged with McDonnell Douglas in the late 90s. Douglas was known for its culture at that aviation firm of being extremely driven by pure financial motives, whereas Boeing had historically been known for having really high-quality engineers and making really high-qualty planes. McDonnell Douglas ownership was very frustrated with this, and apparently we're calling all of these very knowledgeable and capable engineers, hyper-talented a-holes or something like that, and wanted to get rid of them, and was frustrated by the fact that they kept gumming up their ability to simply use prioritize the profit motive over safety or quality. Okay, cut to that. That's the circumstances here. Cut to now we have this big cage of parts that are supposed to be offloaded forever. One of the things that the new Boeing was managed to do is to convince the government that it should do its own quality inspections, not have it outsourced to the FAA. At that point, you're basically in charge of reviewing your own, checking your own work, which an institution like the new culture of Boeing, in the new culture of Boeing, is obviously going to lead to people cheating. Now, here's where they messed up. The last whistleblower, the one who's alleged to have killed himself, John Barnett, who is nicknamed, apparently was Swampy, and he's referred to as Swampy throughout Corey's piece, was one of the people who was assigned to do this checking. And he was not corrupt. He was part of the Boeing old guard. So when he was raising red flags about these kinds of things, there was this enormous amount of pushback. He was fired and cut to, now we know that he's being alleged to have killed himself in the car. But one of the discoveries was that the parts that were discarded and had big permanent red marks on them ended up integrated into God knows how many planes that are currently in the sky right now. That is what's going on at Boeing. This is a huge bombshell realization.
And safety and profits should not necessarily be in tension if the company is not shielded from liability protection or in a purely market operating system, if the product, the plane, whatever is being delivered, is there's an incentive to have it be nicer, safer, better, more efficient, so that you want to fly on those planes, or the airlines want to buy those planes or use those planes, all of that stuff. There's a market incentive. But if there's artificial intervention that prevents an airline or the manufacturer of the airplane that shields them from the harms associated with having sold people a defective product, then you end up, which is exactly what happens in the airline industry. We're describing the total capture by people in a regulatory sense, in an accountability sense. Then you get distorted incentives, and you get, well, we can continue making defective planes, and we're not going to suffer any consequence from it because what can anyone do about it?
Well, corporate corruption and the corruption of our politicians is certainly an issue, but the fact that there is no alternative for the consumer because it's a monopoly is also a really big problem. Boeing is the last American plane manufacturer. There's nowhere else to go. And the enmeshment of Boeing and the government is so complete that you do get a situation where, of course, they're very rich, they're very powerful, they can buy off politicians, but also the government has entangled itself in an investment in Boeing providing it with a much needed resource, not just commercial planes, but military planes as well.
That's what I'm saying.
So there's a lot going on here, and I think people should be raising questions about why it is that these mergers were allowed to happen to completely diminish the ability for consumers to have real choice here. But moreover, to your point about if the airline companies were forced to internalize their costs, then they would be incentivized to be safe. It's a good point, but the problem is that there is no actual efficiency in the market. When you are making assessments about what the value of a life is, that's incredibly subjective. And what ends up happening is courts don't ever penalize companies sufficiently to make it not simply worth their while to let people die and then recoup. You're not going to get a court saying a human life is worth however many billions of dollars it would take for one of these airline companies to actually change its behavior.
I mean, the courts have said it's worth, what, 14 million or something like that?
What, a life?
That's the number the courts put on it.
I mean, it depends on, they base it on your earning potential and things like that, so it varies from person to person. It's a cruel thing to have to estimate, but one of the problems is, and why some law and economics folks, like a professor that I had, in fact, in law school, push for stricter liability standards, is because, one, it's difficult oftentimes to prove liability and causation in the first place, and many people get off the hook that way. That's what happens with a lot of these environmental cases, right? Look at East Palestine. If someone gets cancer 10 years from now, how can they really prove that it's from something that happened, as opposed to the fact that cancer just happens to folks sometimes?
Yeah. So that's a little different than the door breaking off the plane and getting sucked out of it.
Sure. But also, there's also, they can say, I did the review, I checked, I followed all of the rules in terms of the now internal Boeing checks that they're obliged to do for safety. So if you follow the rules, this is part of what the perniciousness around some of these HRDI programs are. They're not there to actually create equality in the workplace. They're there to have something that the companies can say, I checked this list off, so you can't say I was actually being discriminatory. I did everything that I was supposed to do under the law. So yeah, a lot of red flags going off here. I'm really grateful for The Lever to be continuing to cover this, and including specifically the congressional corruption angle, because the names of the people that are directly involved in doing something like unwinding a really good, finally good policy from Joe Biden, make it easier for you to be reimbursed when you have a flight canceled on you. They can't even let us have the good small things.
More Rising right after this.